Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all here, and I appreciate you all, and thank you for coming today. We've been talking about the Genjo Koan, but I'm going to take a brief detour and tell another story that I think is related. Is perhaps the relationship to the Genjo Koan may not be immediately apparent, but will become so, I think, when we return to discussing it. But I'd like to tell a story about a woman who lived in China in the early 12th century, about 100 years before Dogen. And this story was recounted by a woman who lives in Portland, Sally Chico Tisdale, who I actually had the opportunity and the pleasure to meet in the before times when I was at a workshop in Portland. Sally Tisdale is an essayist and a nurse who has written extensively on topics related to Buddhism and to healthcare and to the nexus between the two. Anyway, picking up the few facts that are available about the life of this woman who lived so many years ago, Kongshi, she created a narrative of her life. We do know that she was the daughter of a dignitary in Song, China, who was prominent in provincial affairs and in the government. And we also know that Kongshi was married off in an arranged marriage when she was quite young, to the social advantage of her father, because she was married to the grandson of the prime minister. So it was a good move for the family, her father thought. At that time in China, at least among the upper classes, education was highly valued. And both boys and girls were well educated. Kongshi was highly literate and clever, but she did not take well to the style of the court and became bored with all the courtly gossip and amusements. She didn't fit in with her new life and her new husband. And after a period of years, it became apparent that it just wasn't going to work, and her husband was just as happy letting her go. She had no place else to go but back to her family, so she did that and stayed with her parents. Now, she had developed an interest in all of her reading, an intense interest in Buddhism, and was reading the sutras and studying, and found in herself a strong desire to be a monastic, to become a nun. In order to do so at that time in China, she had to get the permission of her father. Well, her parents actually found her quite useful around the house. She was She had a number of secretarial and clerical skills, as well as she helped with, basic keeping of the house. So her father didn't want her to be ordained. He also had other reasons too. At that time, Buddhism was falling into disfavor in China. They were actually closing Buddhist temples. And perhaps he had concerns that she would be in danger becoming a nun. In any case, her desire was frustrated, and she stayed at home with her aging parents for many years until they both died in about the same year. Well, one might think at that point she would be free to do what she wanted to do, but according to the mores of the culture, her brother became her guardian, being the male head of household. So she asked her brother if she could be ordained, and he declined because, again, she was a useful person to have around. So she stayed with her brother, continuing her studies, and actually initiated some correspondence with some of the teachers at the time, exchanging poems. She wrote many, many poems. In her studies, she gravitated toward a short work called sort of an esoteric work called The Contemplation of the Dharma Dhatu, in which it states, one includes all and enters all. All includes one and enters one. One includes one and enters one. All includes all and enters all. They interpenetrate one another without any obstruction. In this way, one can see the indescribable turning of the world. So she carried on like that, staying with her brother, taking care of the chores of the household, and maintaining some correspondence. I'll share one of the poems that she wrote at the time. Now, these poems, translated from Chinese or Japanese, one has to remember that the poetry also included the beauty of the characters as they're arranged on the page. And we miss all that when they're given to us in translation. So they sound kind of declarative. They lose some of their poetic beauty, in other words. But she says, self and other are never different. The many things in the world are just reflections. Bright, full, holding both principle and practice. Completely experienced. Filled with the absolute. Every single thing holds all things. All things are connected to all things. This continues layer upon layer without end. Moving, still, it never stops. This interpenetration. So you may notice some of the same kinds of language that we find in Dogen's Genjo Koan. So Kongshi stayed with her brother until he died. And by this time, she was elderly. In order to make a livelihood for herself, she became an attendant at a bathhouse. Now, at this time in China, bathhouses were just public facilities where many people would come to bathe because they didn't have the wherewithal to bathe at home in any kind of practical way. So it was quite ordinary to go to a bathhouse periodically to bathe. And the attendant at the bathhouse would keep everything in order, keep everything clean, would gather up the soiled towels at the end of the day, wash them, hang them up to dry, fold the dried towels every morning, lay them out for those who came to bathe. But she didn't stop there. She posted poems around the bathhouse, including a poem that she posted on the door. If nothing truly exists, what are you bathing? Where could even the slightest bit of dust come from? If you say one sentence worth hearing, you may enter the bath. The ancient teachers can only scrub your back. How can I clarify your mind? If you want to be free from dust, sweat with every part of you. Perhaps water washes away dirt, but do you understand that water is also dirty? Even if you see no difference between the water and dirt, it all must be washed away completely when you enter here. So, in a sense, frustrated all of her life with not being able to be a monastic, she in a sense turned her bathhouse into a temple, and did so with an element of humor and jocularity that is evidence that her spirit was not broken. Actually, her bathhouse was near a monastery, and as she became too old to attend the bathhouse anymore, she did enter the monastery, and in her final days became ordained as a nun. So I guess I bring that story up because I do think it relates to what we've been talking about in the Genjo Koan. Of perhaps noticing where one finds oneself, because we oftentimes don't have any choice about where we find ourselves. And creating a sacred space there. or to look at it another way, to accept the sacredness that already exists. I also bring this up because some members of our Sangha have recently found themselves in places they didn't expect to be, didn't really want to be. Serving as caretakers for sickly loved ones, or serving as executives of, or executors of an estate unexpectedly. Taking care of the bills and the headaches that arise in such situations. So I thought Kongshi's life story is an inspirational example of what we can do with what we have and where we are. So I wonder if any of that story resonates. If you can in some way identify with Kongshi, even though she lived 1,000 years ago. One thing we should be able to identify with is the notion of a bathhouse, because it hasn't been that long ago that in St. Louis there were 6 bathhouses. The one on the left is bathhouse number 1. It was at 10th Street and Carr, which is kind of a sad neighborhood now, but wasn't at that time. And tens of thousands of people per year would come through this bathhouse. The bathhouse on the right is the last one that was, well, the first one was opened in 1907. The last one closed in 1965. That's the one on the right, which still stands on St. Louis Avenue, not too far from the candy company down there. Bathhouse number 6. Of course, the bathhouses went away when indoor plumbing became common. But is there anything about this story of Kongshi that resonates, that we can relate to? Being essentially stuck in a situation that you didn't choose and don't particularly care for, and what you do with that. So I think we'll stop there. I appreciate your attention, and I'll